In the cases of infertility, we can have certain assisted reproductive technologies. So science has made advancement in terms of these technologies so that the couple can actually have a child, and that child can be produced, very normal. So we can have certain technologies, namely we can have IVF, that is in vitro fertilization, or you can say in vitro fertilization. Then we have AIT, that is artificial insemination technique. Then we have GIF, that is gamete intrafallopian transfer, and then we have ZIF, that is zygote intrafallopian transfer. So when we talk about this assisted reproductive technologies, then these technologies can help the couple to have a child, to have a normal child. So let's discuss the first technology under this, that is IVF, that is in vitro fertilization. Now by these techniques we can have test tube babies. So you must have heard about this name, that is test tube babies. So they are produced by which technique? That is in vitro fertilization or in vitro fertilization. What happens in this technique? What do we actually mean by this? It means that we are going to have fertilization outside the body. Means fertilization that takes place outside the body, fertilization outside the body. And when there is fertilization outside the body, the same conditions will be there. The same conditions are to be maintained so that fertilization can take place. When we talk about fertilization, we say that there is fusion of sperm and an egg, and the fusion of sperm and egg, they form what? They form zygote. And then the zygote is going to divide. For example, it is an 8-celled stage. Then that 8-celled stage zygote is transferred into the uterus, and there in the uterus the embryo that we have transferred, it becomes fetus, and fetus finally grows into a child, and there can be the normal delivery of the child. So this is what is in vitro fertilization. Now why do we call it as test tube baby? We call it as test tube baby because in this case we are going to have fertilization outside the body. So under laboratory conditions, what happens? Inside the test tubes we are going to have the sperms and we are going to have the eggs. They are allowed to fuse. One sperm is going to enter inside the egg and it is going to form the first cell, that is the zygote. And this zygote is going to divide repeatedly and form an embryo. That embryo is going to be transplanted into what? It is going to be transferred into uterus. And there in the uterus, inside the mother's body, this embryo turns into fetus and fetus grows into a normal child. So this is how in vitro fertilization takes place, right? This is how in vitro fertilization takes place. So remember what happens? We are going to have fertilization outside the body in a laboratory. In that situation, we are going to have the sperms and the eggs that are going to fuse, that are going to form the zygote, and that zygote is allowed to divide repeatedly and this forms an embryo. That embryo is transferred to the uterus of the mother where actually the child is going to grow normally. So in terms of test tube babies, let us see an animation how actually in vitro fertilization takes place. As you all know that there is ovulation, means the release of the egg. So when the egg is released, that egg goes inside the fallopian tubes. It waits for the sperms. To fuse them. You know that only one sperm is going to fuse with the egg. And after fusion, there is the formation of zygote, and the zygote slowly is going to implant itself inside the uterus wall, right? So this is how the process goes on. But under many situations, under many cases, this does not happen. Right, there are infertility cases. So we have assisted reproduction. Number one is what? In vitro fertilization, that is IVF, that I have already explained to you. Now what is going to happen? Initially, if I talk you in terms of medical sense, what is going to happen? The mother is given lot of hormones, reproductive hormones you can say, and that hormones are going to form mature eggs. and these mature eggs are formed inside what? Inside the ovaries. Right, so in the ovaries we have many eggs which are mature now. So many hormones are supplied so that the eggs can be fully mature, and after their maturation, you can say the fluid that is containing those eggs is taken out from the ovaries, right. So when that fluid which is having those eggs is taken out from the ovaries, then they are transferred into you can say in the laboratory conditions in a test tube. And in that test tubes we have what? We have the semen from the male which contains a lot of sperms. So when we have a lot of sperms, only one sperm is going to enter inside this egg and is going to form the first cell, that is the zygote. And then after the formation of this zygote, after this fertilization, what is going to happen? The zygote is going to divide and is going to form this 8-celled stage. And when there is the development of this embryo is implanted, you can say artificially, by this flexible tube inside the uterus. So inside the uterus there is implantation of the embryo, where this embryo is going to develop into a fetus, and this fetus is finally going to develop into a child. So there can be now normal delivery. So this is how many couples opt for this test tube babies or in vitro fertilization. This is how they can have a child, they can have a normal and a healthy child. So this is one of the technologies that can help the couples to have babies, and normal and healthy babies. But overall the success rate of IVF, that is this in vitro fertilization, is just 20%. So success rate is quite less, that is only 20%. So test tube babies survival is quite tough. So what is going to happen? As a whole, the success rate I told you is just 20%. So there are many other options, other technologies that the couples can opt for having their children, for having their own children, for having normal and healthy children. Now if we talk about the first test tube baby, then the name of the first test tube baby was Louise Joy Brown in England. This test tube baby, this technique was used by Dr. Robert Edwards and Dr. Patrick Steptoe. And Dr. Robert Edwards was given the Nobel Prize for for just using this technique, that is in vitro fertilization, with Dr. Patrick Steptoe. So in England, the first test tube baby named Louise Joy Brown was born. And if you talk about India, as you know that now test tube babies, they are in other countries also, they are produced in other countries also. So if we talk about India, the first test tube baby was born on 6th August 1986, and the name was Skum Harsha. And the credit for the first test tube baby in India on 6th August 1986 was given to Dr. Indra Hindya, right? So Dr. Indra takes this credit for producing the first test tube baby in India at KEM hospital in Mumbai. So this was all about in vitro fertilization, means fertilization outside the body, right? So I hope that IVF is clear to you.